She had served the mansion for more than 60 years, quietly cleaning rooms no one noticed. At 85, her hands trembled, her steps slowed, but her loyalty never faded. One evening, she whispered a final wish to the millionaire she had raised like her own son, and what he did next left the entire family in tears. Stay with me until the end, because this story will touch your heart in ways you won't forget. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Margaret Washington had been part of the Sterling family longer than most of the furniture in their grand estate. She arrived in 1963 as a 23-year-old woman with calloused hands and dreams tucked away in her heart. The mansion on Hillcrest Drive stood like a monument to wealth, its marble floors reflecting chandeliers that cost more than most people earned in a year. But Margaret didn't come for the luxury. She came because she needed work, and the Sterlings needed someone who understood that a home was more than just expensive things arranged in perfect order. Mrs. Eleanor Sterling hired Margaret on a Tuesday morning in September. The interview lasted exactly 4 minutes. Margaret stood in the kitchen wearing her best dress, a navy blue cotton with small white flowers that she had sewn herself. Her resume was simple. She had worked for 2 other families, both of whom spoke highly of her character. She didn't have fancy credentials or training from prestigious schools. What she had was something far more valuable. She understood that taking care of a home meant taking care of the people who lived in it. From her first day, Margaret moved through the mansion with quiet purpose. She learned which rooms needed extra attention, which corners gathered dust that others missed, and most importantly, which family members needed gentle care when life became overwhelming. The Sterling family included Mr. Robert Sterling, a successful businessman who built his fortune in real estate development, Mrs. Eleanor, who dedicated her time to charity work and social events, and their 3-year-old son, David. Little David Sterling was a curious child with bright eyes and endless energy. While his parents attended meetings and social gatherings, Margaret became his constant companion. She taught him to tie his shoes, helped him sound out words from picture books, and listened patiently to his endless questions about everything from why the sky was blue to how birds learned to fly. She packed his lunches with extra care, always including a handwritten note that made him smile during school hours. As David grew older, Margaret remained his steady anchor. When he struggled with mathematics homework, she sat beside him at the kitchen table, working through problems with the patience of someone who genuinely cared about his success. When he came home upset about playground conflicts or teenage heartbreak, Margaret was there with warm cookies and wisdom that only comes from years of watching life unfold in all its complicated beauty. The other staff members in the Sterling household changed over the years. Gardeners came and went, cooks were hired and replaced. Even the family driver retired and was succeeded by someone younger. But Margaret remained constant, like the morning sun that always found its way through the east windows of the breakfast room. She watched David graduate from high school as valedictorian, his proud parents beaming from the audience. She helped him pack for college, making sure he had everything he needed, but also slipping in small reminders of home. A favorite blanket, homemade cookies wrapped in plastic, a photo of the family dog. When he called home feeling homesick during his freshman year, Margaret was often the one who answered the phone, offering encouragement that carried him through difficult moments. After college, David returned home briefly before starting his own business ventures. Margaret watched him transform from the curious little boy who asked endless questions into a focused young man with ambitious dreams and the determination to achieve them. She celebrated his first successful deal, worried during his risky investments, and felt proud when his business empire began to flourish. Years passed like pages turning in a well-loved book. Mr. Robert Sterling passed away from a heart attack when David was 32. Margaret held Mrs. Eleanor's hand during the funeral, offering silent strength when words felt inadequate. 3 years later, Mrs. Eleanor developed complications from pneumonia and joined her husband. David, now the sole heir to the sterling fortune and estate, found himself inheriting not just wealth and property, but also the woman who had been more mother to him than employee. Margaret continued working even as her body began showing signs of age. Her movements became slower, more deliberate. The stairs that she once climbed effortlessly now required careful attention and frequent rest stops. But her dedication never wavered. She still arrived every morning at 7 sharp, ready to ensure that David's home remained the sanctuary it had always been. David, now a successful businessman worth several $1 million, often urged Margaret to retire. He offered her a comfortable pension, a small house on the estate grounds, and the promise that she would never want for anything. But Margaret always declined with a gentle smile. This mansion wasn't just her workplace. It was her life, her purpose, her family. She had invested 60 years of love into these walls, and leaving felt impossible. The relationship between David and Margaret had evolved into something beautiful and complex. He was no longer the little boy who needed help tying his shoes, but he still sought her advice on important decisions. She was no longer the young woman who could scrub floors for hours without tiring, but her wisdom and caring heart remained as strong as ever. David made sure Margaret had the best medical care available. When arthritis made her daily tasks more challenging, he hired additional staff to handle the heavier cleaning, while ensuring Margaret could focus on the details that brought her joy. When her eyesight began to dim, he installed better lighting throughout the house and arranged for regular eye examinations with the city's top specialists. Their daily routine became a dance of mutual care and respect. Margaret would prepare David's morning coffee exactly the way he preferred it, and David would insist she sit and share breakfast with him, treating her more like beloved family than hired help. They would discuss his business meetings, her doctor appointments, memories of his parents, and plans for maintaining the beautiful gardens that surrounded their home. But as Margaret's 85th birthday approached, both of them began to sense that their time together was becoming more precious. Her steps had grown noticeably slower. Her hands, once steady and sure, now shook slightly when she carried delicate items. The woman who had been a pillar of strength for 6 decades was finally showing the weight of all those years of devoted service. One evening in late October, as autumn leaves painted the estate grounds in shades of gold and red, Margaret knocked softly on David's study door. He looked up from his computer to see her standing in the doorway, her silver hair neatly pinned back, wearing the simple black dress she always chose for their more serious conversations. "David," she said softly, "may I speak with you for a moment?" There was something different in her voice, a weight that made him immediately close his laptop and give her his full attention. "Of course, Margaret. Please come in and sit down." She walked slowly across the Persian rug that had been in his father's study for 30 years. Margaret had cleaned this rug countless times, knew every intricate pattern, every place where sunlight had faded the colors just slightly. She settled into the leather chair across from David's desk, the same chair where she had sat years ago when his parents needed to discuss household matters. David leaned forward, his hands folded on the desk. The soft glow from the desk lamp created gentle shadows on both their faces. Outside, the October wind rustled through the oak trees that lined the estate's driveway, the same trees that had been saplings when Margaret first arrived. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice steady but quiet, "about everything. About these 60 years, about watching you grow up, about this beautiful home we've shared." David nodded, sensing that whatever Margaret wanted to say had been weighing on her heart for some time. "You know I love this place," she continued. "These walls hold more memories than I could ever count. I've seen joy here, and sorrow. I've watched your parents host wonderful dinner parties in the dining room. I've seen you take your first steps in the hallway upstairs. I've celebrated every milestone of your life within these rooms." Margaret paused, her fingers tracing the arm of the leather chair. David waited patiently, understanding that she needed time to find the right words for whatever was stirring in her heart. But I'm getting old, David. My body reminds me every morning when I wake up. My hands shake when I try to dust the delicate china. My eyes struggle to see the corners that need attention. The stairs that I used to climb without thinking twice now feel like mountains. David felt his chest tighten. He had been dreading this conversation, knowing it would come eventually, but hoping it was still years away. Margaret, you know you'll always have a place here. Always. This is your home, too. She smiled, the same warm smile that had comforted him through childhood nightmares and teenage heartbreaks. I know, dear, and that means more to me than you'll ever understand. But I need to tell you something important. I have one final wish, something I've been carrying in my heart for a very long time. The room grew very quiet. Even the old grandfather clock in the corner seemed to tick more softly, as if it too understood the significance of this moment. David leaned forward, giving Margaret his complete attention. You remember my grandson Marcus, don't you? The one I've told you about over the years? Margaret's eyes brightened slightly as she spoke his name. David nodded. He remembered Margaret mentioning Marcus many times, always with pride in her voice. Marcus was the son of Margaret's daughter, who had passed away from cancer when Marcus was just 15. Of course I remember. You've shown me his school pictures, told me about his good grades, his dreams of becoming a teacher. Margaret's face softened. He's 26 now. He graduated from college 3 years ago. Got his teaching degree just like he always wanted. He's working at an inner-city school, trying to make a difference for children who need someone to believe in them. That sounds wonderful, Margaret. You must be so proud of him. David could see the love in her eyes as she spoke about her grandson, the same love she had always shown him. I am proud, she said. But David, he's struggling. The school where he works doesn't pay much. He's living in a tiny apartment, barely making ends meet. He takes extra jobs on weekends just to pay for school supplies for his students. He buys books with his own money because the school doesn't have enough funding. Margaret's voice grew softer, more vulnerable. He calls me every Sunday, and I can hear the exhaustion in his voice. He never complains, never asks for anything. He's too proud for that. But I know he's worried about his future, about whether he'll ever be able to afford a real home, maybe start a family of his own someday. David began to understand where this conversation was leading. His heart ached as he watched Margaret struggle with her emotions. She had given 60 years of her life to caring for his family, and now she was worried about the one person who mattered most to her. My wish, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, is that Marcus could have a chance, a real chance. I know he would never accept charity, but maybe there's a way to help him without him knowing it comes from us. Maybe a scholarship opportunity or a grant for teachers, or something that would give him hope for his future. Tears began to form in Margaret's eyes. I've saved some money over the years, but it's not much. Certainly not enough to change his life. I just want to know that when I'm gone, someone I love will have the opportunities I never had. David felt his own eyes filling with tears. Here was this remarkable woman who had devoted her entire adult life to caring for others, asking for help, not for herself, but for her beloved grandson. The selflessness of her request took his breath away. Margaret, he said gently, reaching across the desk to take her trembling hands in his. You don't need to worry about Marcus anymore. We're going to take care of this together. But first, I need you to know something. You've never been just our employee. You've been family. You raised me, loved me, supported me through everything. Whatever I can do for Marcus, I want to do. Margaret squeezed his hands, her tears flowing freely now. Thank you, she whispered. That's all I wanted to hear. That's my last wish, David, to know that Marcus will be okay. What Margaret didn't know was that David had already been thinking about ways to honor her decades of service and love. Her request simply gave him the perfect opportunity to do something extraordinary. As they sat together in the quiet study, surrounded by memories of a lifetime shared, David began forming a plan that would not only fulfill Margaret's wish, but would also ensure her legacy of love and service would continue for generations to come. The next morning, David made several phone calls. His first was to his attorney, then to his financial advisor, and finally to a private investigator who specialized in background research. Within a week, he had a complete picture of Marcus Washington's life, his work, his character, and his needs. What David discovered impressed him deeply. Marcus was indeed everything Margaret had described and more. His students adored him. His principal had written glowing reviews of his dedication and innovative teaching methods. Despite his financial struggles, Marcus had never missed a day of work and had started an after-school tutoring program using his own time and resources. But David's plan went far beyond simply helping with Marcus's immediate financial needs. He wanted to create something lasting, something that would honor Margaret's lifetime of service while giving Marcus the foundation for a truly meaningful future. As he worked out the details, David realized that Margaret's final wish was about to become something much more powerful than either of them had imagined. David spent the next 2 weeks crafting his plan with the precision of someone who understood that some gifts change lives forever. He contacted the principal of Marcus's school, introducing himself as an anonymous donor interested in supporting exceptional teachers. What he learned confirmed everything Margaret had told him and more. Marcus Washington had transformed his classroom into a haven for children who had never experienced educational support at home. He arrived at school an hour early every morning to help struggling students with homework. He stayed late to tutor those preparing for college entrance exams. On his own dime, he had created a small library in his classroom, filled with books that reflected the diverse backgrounds of his students. The principal, Mrs. Rodriguez, spoke with genuine emotion about Marcus's impact. Last month, she explained, one of his former students called to thank him. The young man had just received a full scholarship to college and credited Marcus with believing in him when no one else would. Stories like this happened regularly with Marcus's students, but what struck David most was learning about Marcus's living situation. The young teacher rented a small studio apartment in a building with broken elevators and unreliable heating. His car, a 15-year-old sedan, broke down so frequently that he often walked to school in all weather conditions. Yet despite these hardships, Marcus had never missed a parent conference or school event. David's attorney worked quietly to establish what they called the Sterling Educational Foundation. On paper, it appeared to be funded by multiple anonymous donors committed to supporting outstanding educators in underserved communities. The foundation would provide grants, scholarships, and resources to teachers who demonstrated exceptional dedication to their students. Meanwhile, David arranged for a local news station to do a feature story on innovative teachers making a difference in challenging school environments. The reporter, unaware of David's involvement, interviewed several educators recommended by the school district. Marcus's story stood out immediately. The news segment aired on a Thursday evening. Marcus appeared humble and thoughtful as he spoke about his teaching philosophy. He showed the camera his classroom library and explained how he had collected the books over 3 years, buying them whenever he could afford to add new titles. He talked about his students with the pride of a parent, describing their achievements and dreams for the future. What viewers didn't see was David watching from his study, Margaret beside him on the sofa. She pressed a handkerchief to her eyes as she watched her grandson on television, speaking with such passion about his work and his students. "He looks just like his mother when she talked about her dreams," Margaret whispered. She always wanted to make a difference, too. The next phase of David's plan required careful coordination. The Sterling Educational Foundation announced that Marcus had been selected to receive their inaugural Excellence in Teaching Award. The honor came with a substantial cash prize, a new car, and funding for classroom resources. But David wasn't finished. He had quietly purchased a small house in a safe neighborhood near Marcus's school. The foundation would offer it to Marcus at an incredibly reduced rate, presented as subsidized housing for educators committed to working in challenging districts. The monthly payments would be less than his current rent, but the most meaningful part of David's plan involved Margaret directly. though she didn't know it yet. David arranged for the Sterling Educational Foundation to announce that they were establishing a mentorship program, pairing experienced community members with young teachers. Margaret, they would explain, had been recommended as someone with a lifetime of experience in creating nurturing environments and supporting young people's growth. On the morning of the award ceremony, David helped Margaret choose her best dress. She selected a deep blue outfit with pearl buttons that she had worn to special occasions for 20 years. Her hands shook slightly as she pinned a small brooch to her collar, but her eyes sparkled with anticipation. The ceremony took place at the school auditorium. Marcus had no idea his grandmother would be there. He arrived expecting a simple presentation, perhaps a few colleagues and administrators in attendance. Instead, he found the auditorium filled with students, parents, fellow teachers, and local community leaders. Margaret sat in the front row, her heart pounding as she watched Marcus walk onto the stage. David sat beside her, holding her hand as the foundation representative began describing the award recipient's extraordinary dedication to his students. Marcus's face showed genuine shock as they announced the cash prize, the new car, and the classroom funding. But when they called Margaret to the stage as his assigned mentor through the foundation's new program, his composure completely crumbled. "Grandma Margaret?" he whispered into the microphone, his voice breaking. "What are you doing here?" Margaret walked slowly across the stage, her arthritis making each step deliberate. When she reached Marcus, he wrapped her in a gentle embrace, tears streaming down both their faces. The foundation representative explained that Margaret had been selected based on her 60 years of experience creating supportive environments and nurturing young people's development. She would work with Marcus to expand his classroom programs and share her wisdom about building lasting relationships with those in her care. What Marcus didn't know, and what Margaret was only beginning to understand, was that David had created something far more elaborate than a simple mentorship program. After the ceremony, David invited both Margaret and Marcus to dinner at the estate. As they drove through the gates of the Hillcrest Drive mansion, Marcus stared in wonder at the sprawling grounds and elegant architecture. "Margaret," he said quietly, "you never told me the family you worked for lived in a place like this." Margaret smiled, patting his hand. "There's a lot I never told you, dear, but tonight, I think it's time you learned about the family that became my family." During dinner in the formal dining room, David shared stories about growing up with Margaret as his constant source of love and guidance. He described how she had taught him values that no amount of wealth could purchase. He explained how her wisdom had guided him through business decisions, personal challenges, and moments when he questioned his purpose in life. Marcus listened with growing amazement as he realized the depth of the relationship between his grandmother and this successful businessman, who clearly considered her family. But David had one more surprise planned. After dessert, he asked them to join him in his study. On his desk lay a thick folder of documents. David's hands were steady, but his voice carried the weight of emotion as he began to speak. "Margaret," he said, "for 60 years, you gave everything to our family. You raised me with more love and patience than many children receive from their biological parents. You taught me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the impact we have on other people's lives." He opened the folder and pulled out several papers. "I've been thinking about how to properly thank you for everything you've given us. Your wish to help Marcus gave me the perfect opportunity to do something I should have done years ago." David looked at both Margaret and Marcus, his eyes bright with unshed tears. The Sterling Educational Foundation isn't just supporting Marcus's teaching career. We've established an endowment in your honor, Margaret. The Margaret Washington Scholarship Fund will provide college funding for students from underserved communities who show the same dedication and character that you've demonstrated your entire life. Margaret's hand flew to her heart. "David, that's too much. You don't need to. I'm not finished," he said gently. "Marcus, your grandmother saved money for decades, always putting aside what she could despite earning modest wages. She never spent money on herself, always thinking about others first. I've matched her lifetime savings 10 times over. That money, combined with the foundation's support, means you'll never have to worry about finances again. You can focus entirely on what you do best, inspiring and educating young people. Marcus stared at the documents in disbelief. The numbers seemed impossible. The house David had purchased was now fully paid for and deeded to Marcus. The foundation would provide ongoing support for his classroom programs, professional development, and any educational initiatives he wanted to pursue. But there's one more thing, David continued. Margaret, you've always said this mansion was your home. I want to make that official. I'm deeding you the guest house on the grounds. It's yours for as long as you live, with full access to all the medical care and support you could ever need. You'll never have to worry about anything ever again. Margaret was crying now, overwhelmed by the magnitude of David's generosity. But it was Marcus who spoke first. Mr. Sterling, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know how to accept all this. It's more than I ever dreamed possible. David smiled, the same warm expression Margaret had seen countless times over the years. You accept it by continuing to be exactly who you are, by loving your students the way your grandmother loved me, by understanding that sometimes the greatest gift we can receive is the opportunity to give. Margaret reached for both their hands. For 60 years, she said softly, I thought I was just doing my job. I never imagined that caring for this family would lead to something so beautiful. The three of them sat in comfortable silence as the implications of the evening settled over them. Outside, the October wind continued rustling through the oak trees, but inside the study, something profound had shifted. A lifetime of service had been honored. A young man's future had been secured, and a family bond that transcended traditional definitions had been celebrated and strengthened. But the story was far from over. What happened in the weeks that followed would prove that David's generosity had set in motion something even more powerful than any of them anticipated. Margaret's final wish had become the foundation for a legacy that would impact countless lives for generations to come. Margaret's transformation over the following weeks was remarkable to witness. The weight she had carried for so long seemed to lift from her shoulders as she watched Marcus settle into his new life. The young teacher moved into his house with the wonder of someone stepping into a dream he never dared to imagine. Every room represented possibilities he had never allowed himself to consider. David made sure Margaret was present for every milestone. When Marcus received the keys to his new car, Margaret sat beside him in the passenger seat as he drove around the neighborhood, both of them laughing like children discovering a new playground. When the first scholarship recipients were announced from the Margaret Washington Fund, she wept as David read their names aloud, each one representing a young person who would now have opportunities that might have remained forever out of reach. But it was the quiet moments that revealed the true depth of what David had accomplished. Margaret would sit in her new guest house each morning, looking out at the gardens she had tended to for decades, now knowing they would always be part of her world. The small cottage David had prepared for her was perfect, with wide doorways for easier walking, grab bars discreetly installed in the bathroom, and large windows that filled every room with natural light. Marcus visited every weekend, sometimes bringing lesson plans to discuss with his grandmother, other times simply sitting with her on the front porch swing David had installed. Their conversations revealed how much they had both grown through this experience. Marcus spoke with new confidence about his teaching goals, while Margaret shared stories from her decades of service that she had never told anyone before. The ripple effects of David's generosity extended far beyond what any of them had anticipated. Word spread quietly through the community about the Sterling Educational Foundation and its support for dedicated teachers. Other educators began reaching out, hoping to learn about opportunities for their own students and programs. Local businesses started contributing to the foundation, inspired by the example of investing in education and community development. Margaret's role as a mentor became more meaningful than anyone had expected. She began visiting Marcus's school regularly, not as an official volunteer, but as someone whose presence brought calm and wisdom to chaotic situations. Students who had never experienced the steady support of an elder found themselves drawn to her gentle guidance. Teachers sought her advice about connecting with difficult students or managing classroom challenges. One afternoon, as Margaret sat in Marcus's classroom helping students with reading, she noticed a young girl struggling with a picture book. The child reminded Margaret of herself at that age, hungry for knowledge but lacking the resources to satisfy that hunger. Margaret pulled up a chair beside the girl and began reading aloud, her voice carrying the same warmth that had comforted David decades earlier. The girl's eyes lit up as Margaret brought the story to life, using different voices for each character and pausing to ask questions that helped the child understand the plot. When the session ended, the girl hugged Margaret tightly and whispered, "Will you come back tomorrow?" Margaret's heart swelled as she promised she would. That evening, Margaret called David to share what had happened. Her voice carried an excitement he hadn't heard in years. "David," she said, "I think I understand now why you did all this. It wasn't just about helping Marcus or honoring my service. You were creating something that would keep growing, touching more lives than we could count." David smiled as he listened to her enthusiasm. He had indeed hoped for exactly this kind of expansion, but hearing Margaret discover it for herself felt even better than he had imagined. "You always taught me that the best gifts are the ones that keep giving," he replied. "I just wanted to make sure your gift to our family could reach as many people as possible." As autumn turned to winter, the foundation's impact became more visible throughout the community. Marcus's classroom had been transformed into a model learning environment, with new computers, books, and educational materials that other schools began requesting to visit and study. The scholarship program had funded 12 students in its first semester, each one showing remarkable improvement in their academic performance. Margaret's story shows us that love planted in one heart can bloom across generations. Her 60 years of quiet service became the foundation for countless futures. David's response to her final wish proved that true wealth isn't what we accumulate, but what we give away. Sometimes the most powerful legacies begin with the simplest acts of devotion. What moved you most about Margaret's journey? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories that remind us how one person's kindness can change the world forever.